How did your interest in dogs come about? Yeah. And tell me a little bit about how that transition happened.
So growing up in Iowa, I was inundated and fascinated by duck dogs. Mostly labs and retrievers doing blind work with retrieving ducks, and duck hunting is a big popular thing in Iowa. And I never got super in the weeds with it. I had several close friends who them and their dads had 4 or 5 dogs and did a lot of duck hunting and whatever. So I was around it, but never really a part of it. But I was always fascinated by it, but to a degree where I think goes beyond the scope of what most kids would think of and appreciate, which is kind of I was awestruck by the capabilities of the dogs. A lot of it was from kind of an olfactory standpoint of just seeing dogs like walking. We had a black lab growing up, and walking him, in the middle of winter and seeing him like air scent something and then trail it for 15, 20 feet and then head snap and would dive down 6 inches under the snow. There's like a half-eaten ketchup packet or something, yeah. You're just like, what the fuck? Like, how is that even, and so I just marveled at something that stupid. And that fascinated me and made me really interested in that aspect of it, as well as their ability from a physical grit standpoint of them being able to, break ice and get in the water and not hype out and, run through, thorn bush, or gnarly fucking scrub brush that would, deter us from walking through it, and they just plow right through it. And just their personality. I was just, I think a lot of kids growing up, like dogs and are dog kids growing up, but I was at a different level, a higher level of my fascination with them. And then when I was in Iraq, there was a bomb dog that saved a group of Marines in the area, in one of the areas we were operating in. And that was the light switch moment for me that, growing up being very passionate and interested in dogs, and then seeing that, and that was just kind of this instant handshake of, passion and work. And I was just like, I need to get into this, and couldn't get enough of it. And so for the first several years, it was all a hobby. It was just something I was interested in. I was not doing anything with it in the military. And at that same time, after I'd gotten into it real heavy from a hobby standpoint, then I went over to be an instructor, and it was, where we were putting kids through Buzz was basically co-located with the kennel facility for the West Coast Multipurpose Canine or SEAL Canine program. And so
that's serendipitous.
Yeah. So I introduced myself to them, started, doing some training with them and just hanging out with them and watching training and just not really getting involved in an official capacity, but just being around it and being interested in it and asking questions and talking with the guys. And then ultimately, I went on a training trip with them through this decoy course and did some other training trips with them. And then that's when they offered me a position as a handler, which at that time, I had already bought my property here in Texas, had planned on getting out because I had gotten the lung disease called coccidiomycosis or valley fever, and I'd lost 40% of my lung capacity. They tried to medically retire me, or offered to medically retire me, and I kind of weaseled my way out of it to wait until I could get a college degree and have both my kids born, and then was at a big crossroads of, do I stay in and be a handler, or do I stick with the plan of getting out and starting my own training company? And two things were at play. One was I honestly was not confident in my ability physically to be able to continue to do the job, given that they tried to medically retire me for my lung condition, which, still exists to this day. And, the last thing I wanted to be was a liability to any of the guys. And so that was a big doubt I had, a big self-doubt I had. But then the other thing too was I've generally taken the what's going to give me the most bang for my buck approach in big life decisions. What's giving you the most juice for the squeeze kind of thing. And I felt like as awesome as it would be to be, with a dog and go overseas and do canine handler deployments, I felt like I could make a bigger impact and do more good owning a company where we're training dozens or hundreds or thousands of dogs and handlers and people. And so it was a tough decision, and it's one where I wouldn't say I regret not being a handler, but that's for sure one thing that I would have loved to have done at least
Yeah.
once. But I didn't, and the reality of it is if I had, I probably would have stayed in for the full 20 instead of 12, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
Yep.
Wouldn't be in the position I'm in, so I don't look at it negatively or again, like a regret. It is something that I wish I'd done, but I certainly don't dwell on it because, it's not like I can change it. So,
right.
But yeah, so, going back to when I first got out, which was at the end of '08, started the company in the fall of '09 and have been doing it ever since. When I first started out, it was pretty hyper focused on government contracts, military working dogs, police dogs, even explosive detection dogs. And for that first half a dozen years or so, it was pretty solely or exclusively geared towards that. Started the Warrior Dog Foundation kind of out of necessity. There were a couple of dogs that needed to be retired, and they were going to euthanize them if me or none of the other guys in my position would take them. So I just said, shit, I'll take them.
Yeah.
And so that, again, it wasn't some plan I had. It was more out of necessity. And so I just did it. And now it's turned into where we've, taken in hundreds of dogs and have been going for 15 years now. But
how do you leverage those dogs? Are you just caring for them, letting them do their thing, or do they have a task? It seems like those kind of dogs would want to be doing something still.
Yeah. So, I mean, in official capacity, no. The key is just like with human beings is good nutrition, lots of time outside, sunlight, exercise, physical stimulation, and some sort of mental stimulation. The nice thing with a dog is that you hear that a lot. People are like, oh, my dog needs a job. He's bored. Mental stimulation is mental stimulation. You and I can rationalize and put a title on having a job. Dogs just need to be mentally satiated. And so as long as you're accomplishing that, which we do, then the dogs are in a good place and it's not a problem. But it is a lot of work taking dogs in, because the dogs that we take in are all ones that have bit people they weren't supposed to, and kind of got to a point with their entity where they opted to euthanize the dog instead of continuing to try to work through problems or whatever. That's where we step in and we take them. So, we're getting the Hannibal Lecters of the dog world right out of the gate,
Yeah.
And so all of my, pretty much every one of my staff members, with only a few exceptions in the last 15 years, have all been bit, most of them several times. And it's not a nip where it, kind of breaks the skin. I mean, it's like put you in the hospital with 90 stitches, type of bad, so, I mean, I've been bit a bunch of times too, but, yeah, so it's dangerous, and you got to recruit people from significant or specific backgrounds that, it's not just, a mom and pop doggy daycare place with, flimsy kennel panels. It's, it's built like a Supermax prison and everything's epoxy coated concrete with rebar reinforcement. And, it's a lot of work, and it's dangerous. But, to be able to walk up to the kennel facility and we have 30 dogs, 30 spaces that are always full. We have a waiting list of, a dozen or so dogs at any given time. To be able to walk a loop around and see 30 sets of eyeballs that are looking at you, and that, if we hadn't taken them, they'd be dead right now,
Yeah.
so it's super rewarding. It's tough, but it's rewarding.